Well, let's go from the sublime to the ridiculous and talk about Foo Fighters then.
Okay. Um, yeah, Foo Fighters. I can't remember how. Oh, I know how I ended up on that record. We mentioned Luke Wood before. Luke Wood, who was he's the president of Beats. He just left a little while ago. But he produced he didn't produce, he signed Jimmy Eat World to Interscope. And I mixed an album for Jimmy Eat World called Futures. That was produced by Gil Norton.
Yeah.
Gil's I'm a huge fan of his. He's done so many incredible albums over the years. And that was super cool for me to be involved on that. And that went well. And so then a couple years later, Gil had produced the first Foo Fighters, well, actually the second Foo Fighters album, Color and the Shape, which kind of broke them. They invited him back to produce another album, and Gil brought me in, and we mixed it out here on a vintage Neve console, 8078. It was a super fun process. I mean, Dave's just a hilarious guy to spend time with. When it gets down to business, shit's pretty serious.
Right.
But he is very entertaining and is an amazing storyteller, as obviously we all know.
Yeah.
But that was, there was a little bit of mix leeway going on. There were rough mixes that I certainly had to pay attention to. But like at the beginning of The Pretender, and like none of us, like a lot of albums when you're working on them, you think like, oh, this song's kind of good. We have no idea if anyone else is necessarily going to like it, and we didn't know what the singles were going to be on that album when we were mixing it. It hadn't occurred to us which ones might stand out from the rest. But I do remember mixing The Pretender, and that like the beginning, the vocals are hard panned, and there's a few other. I tried to make it sound like the Beatles, the intro before the song kicks in, and that was something that he hadn't heard before and seemed pretty excited about at the time. Mostly the other thing that was notable about that process is for some reason, I don't know why, but for years as a mixer, I would never cut frequencies. I would only boost things.
Right.
The whole time I was doing all those records for Rick, and around this time, I just didn't. I think mostly because you're working on old knees, which are so broad that you can't.
Yeah, they're not made for that. No, maybe a filter, but yeah, you're not cutting.
Yeah, and you could cut in the computer if something was wrong, but I hadn't developed that habit yet. So it was mostly just fucking boosting everything. So there was like no headroom, and so all the meters in the room were just pinned everywhere. And Dave came in on like the first couple of days and was looking around and was like, I think a little unnerved. So I put white tape on all the meters in the room and drew in a VU that was right in the proper zone. So whenever he came in, he couldn't see what was happening.
And he never caught on.
I mean, I'm much better now with my headroom, but those records are just, they're squeezed and slammed with it. They weren't really that compressed, but it's just like, slammed.
No, I mean, look, there's so much talk about, the volume wars and all of that. And, and especially like the Metallica record that I mixed half of and won the loudness war. Thank you. But it's hard for people to get how, especially on a full analog mix, how different it sounds if you pull everything back even a dB. Things fall apart. Other things might be better, and there might be room and sound staging and blah, 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 but it loses stuff, and it's because everything is breaking, and things break in a good way. But when you're breaking like 70 things a little bit, you can't bring it back. You cannot.
I mean, that's a perfect way to put it, because I kept I would trim the faders back and I'd be like, it seems a little funny. Maybe I'll just adjust this one thing. And then a half hour later, everything's back to where he started. And I would do that like 2 or 3 times. And I would just like, fuck it. I guess I think this just sounds good to me,
Yeah.
Which is hard on the SSLJ, because that board had no headroom. So that was super complicated to mix on that thing. I have a pair of EAR compressors that I would mix everything through, and I lined them to -6. So whatever was coming out of the mix bus, they would instantly be brought down 6 dB before they would hit the insert return on the SSL. Right. Otherwise, shit blowing up every day.
Yeah, but it's just a totally different sound. And then, people use that as the argument, well, you've got to use analog gear and you can't not use analog gear, which we're not going to get into at all. But I mean, I remember Rick's, the 8068 he had at his house, which I mixed a bunch of stuff on. That master fader had a big black knob at -15 because that's where that thing was going to sit. And then you'd still uncal the half-inch machine because it was too loud.
Right. That's
Always.
Right. Yeah, you'd always uncal the half-inch machine. Forgot about that. Yeah, I'd never print onto a caled half-inch machine ever. It would always be down to -5.
Yeah.
Input.
Yeah, it'd be perfectly aligned for your headroom, and then you'd have to go boink because there's no way in hell it was going to fit. But who cared? You just turned up the output. You could listen to it. It was fine.
But I kept thinking it's because I was doing something wrong.
Well, me too. We're both doing everything wrong.